The rain had been falling for hours, a relentless drizzle that turned the streets of the small Pennsylvania town into rivers of gray. In the dim light of the street lamp, a solitary figure paused, staring at the house across the street. Its windows were dark, shuttered as if hiding secrets that had long been buried. Jonathan Mills clenched his fists, feeling the cold steel of the past pressing against his chest. Tonight, he was not just visiting an old family home. Tonight, he was about to unearth a truth that could shatter everything he had tried to hold together. Jonathan had not set foot in his hometown for over 20 years. The memories of his childhood were fragmented, a collage of laughter, arguments, and the faint, lingering fear that something was always wrong. His father, a respected man in the community, had always seemed distant, almost ghostly in his kindness. But Jonathan had grown up sensing the tension beneath the polite smiles, the quiet whispers behind closed doors. And then came the day that changed everything, a crime that had torn their family apart and left scars that time had not healed. He reached the front porch, his boots splashing in the puddles. The door was locked, but that did not deter him. Jonathan's mother, Evelyn, had left years ago, leaving him and his sister, Margaret, in the care of a father who seemed more a stranger than a parent. Margaret, now a mother herself, had never forgiven him for leaving, for disappearing without explanation. Yet tonight he had no choice but to confront the past. Inside, the house smelled of damp wood and decay. Dust motes danced in the pale light that filtered through the cracked blinds. Jonathan's fingers traced the edge of a photograph on the mantelpiece, a family portrait taken before the world seemed to crumble around them. He could almost hear the echoes of laughter, the murmur of his mother's voice, the stern but comforting tone of his father. But beneath it all, the shadow lingered, a crime that no one ever spoke about, a disappearance that remained unsolved. "Jonathan?" The voice startled him. Margaret appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and anger. She had not expected him. "What are you doing here, after all these years?" "I had to come back," Jonathan said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I need to understand everything." Margaret's expression hardened. "Everything? You mean the part of our family you abandoned? The part that hurt the most?" He stepped closer, feeling the weight of her accusation. "I didn't abandon you. There are things I couldn't explain then, things I thought I had to protect you from." Her laugh was bitter. "Protect me? You think walking away was protection? You think hiding the truth was keeping anyone safe?" Jonathan swallowed hard, memories flashing like lightning. His father arguing in hushed tones with strangers in the night, his mother's sudden departure, the police knocking on their door asking questions he was too young to answer. And then, the pivotal night, 20 years ago, when their world had cracked open. A crime, a disappearance, a secret that had defined their lives ever since. "I need to find out what really happened," Jonathan said, his eyes locking on hers. "I can't move forward until I know the truth, even if it destroys everything." Margaret stared at him for a long moment, her jaw tight, the room heavy with unspoken words. Finally, she stepped aside. "Then you'd better be ready. What you find might not be what you expect." As Jonathan moved past her into the hallway, a cold draft swept through the house, carrying with it the scent of old wood and forgotten memories. He could feel it, something waiting, a secret buried beneath layers of lies and silence. Somewhere in this house, the answers to a crime that had haunted his family for decades were hidden. And with each step, he felt the tension building, the shadow of the past closing in. Then, from the basement, a faint creak echoed, a sound that made Jonathan freeze. His heart pounded in his chest. Was it the wind, or had someone, or something, just moved down there? He reached for the light switch, but the bulb flickered weakly, leaving the basement in a shadowed abyss. And then, a whisper, barely audible, carried through the darkness. "Jonathan, you shouldn't have come back." The words sent a chill down his spine. He realized, with a mixture of fear and determination, that this night would change everything. The past he had tried to escape was not done with him yet. And as the storm raged outside, the first layer of the family's darkest secret began to peel away, revealing a truth that could destroy them all. The air was thick with mildew and dust, and every step Jonathan took echoed like a drumbeat in the silence. He gripped the railing as he descended into the basement. the dim light from the flickering bulb above barely illuminating the stairs. Boxes were stacked haphazardly, covered with yellowed newspapers. Old furniture leaned at impossible angles. Something about the room felt alive. Margaret's warning rang in his ears. What you find might not be what you expect. He took a deep breath and began opening boxes, pulling out old letters, photographs, and newspaper clippings. Most were mundane, remnants of a lifelong past. But one envelope, worn at the edges and sealed with red wax, caught his attention. The initials RM were scrawled on the front. He tore it open. Inside, a letter dated the day after his mother left, written in his father's hand. The truth cannot stay buried forever. If anything happens to me, Jonathan must know. The letter ended abruptly. Before he could read more, a noise, a shuffling sound, came from the far corner of the basement. Jonathan froze. A shadow moved, and he caught a glimpse of a figure slipping behind a pile of crates. "Who's there?" he called, trying to keep his voice steady. No answer. Only the sound of breathing, slow and deliberate, as if the basement itself were watching him. Jonathan's heart raced. He had imagined he would find memories, maybe old family relics. But something else was down here, something waiting. He reached for a flashlight, clicking it on. Its beam swept across the corner, landing on a small, metal box. The lock had been broken, the contents spilling slightly. Jonathan's breath caught. Inside were old photographs of his father with men he did not recognize. Men wearing suits, smiling in a way that hinted at secrets and unspoken deals. A newspaper clipping fell to the floor. Its headline screamed, "Local businessman disappears amid embezzlement scandal." The man in the photos was his father, Jonathan realized with a jolt. His mind reeled. Had his father been involved in something criminal? Then a voice, low, almost a whisper, behind him. "You shouldn't have come here, Jonathan." He spun around. The basement was empty, but the words lingered. Fear and curiosity tangled within him. Whatever had been hidden for decades was finally stirring, and Jonathan knew the path forward would be dangerous. But he could not turn back. Not now. Cliffhanger. Jonathan hears footsteps above, soft but unmistakable, like someone pacing, someone waiting to confront him. Jonathan carried the metal box upstairs with care, his fingers trembling slightly. He laid the contents on the dining table. Faded photographs, yellowed letters, and a worn leather-bound diary with a cracked spine. The diary had belonged to his mother, Evelyn, and the first page was dated 2 weeks before her sudden disappearance. As he flipped through the pages, he read her voice, intimate, raw, desperate. She described arguments with his father. Arguments that seemed petty on the surface, but hid a deeper, darker tension. A man from the town had come to their house repeatedly, and Evelyn wrote about fearing for their children. "I cannot stay," one line read, "not while shadows linger around our lives." Jonathan's hands trembled. Shadows? He remembered the whisper in the basement. Had it been her warning, or something else entirely? He heard footsteps above and froze. Margaret appeared at the doorway, her face pale. "You're really going through her things?" she asked, her voice tight with caution. "I need to know," Jonathan said firmly. "I can't pretend anymore. Whatever happened to Mom, to Dad, I have to understand." Margaret's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained sharp. "Some truths are dangerous, Jonathan. Some secrets are better left buried." Ignoring her warning, Jonathan continued reading. There was mention of a meeting between his father and a man called Richard Nolan. The diary described it as tense, secretive, and most alarmingly, tied to a crime that had shocked the community. A disappearance that had never been solved. Evelyn hinted that Jonathan's father had tried to protect the family by covering up certain details, but she feared it had cost her safety. Jonathan felt a chill. The family he thought he knew had lived under lies and fear, carefully curated to hide the truth. And now, decades later, he was stepping directly into the darkness his parents had tried to shield him from. "Jonathan," Margaret's voice trembled. "I think you need to stop. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed." But he couldn't stop. The diary ended abruptly with a cryptic note. "If anything happens to me, Jonathan must know the truth is closer than he thinks." Suddenly, a loud crash came from the hallway. Jonathan dropped the diary, and it fell open to a page marked with a red ribbon. The floorboard above had been struck hard, as if someone was trying to send a message or warn him. He rushed to the window, but all he saw was darkness. Rain pattered against the roof, a steady rhythm that seemed almost like a countdown. Jonathan's mind raced. The diary had reopened wounds he didn't know existed, and with every page, the shadows of the past seemed closer. The voice on the phone was raspy, tense. Jonathan tried to trace the number, but it was unlisted. He hung up, heart racing. Then a knock came at the front door. Slow. Deliberate. Peering through the peephole, Jonathan saw a tall man in a gray coat, umbrella dripping rainwater onto the porch. The man's eyes were sharp, calculating. Jonathan opened the door cautiously. "Can I help you?" he asked. "Jonathan Mills," the man said. "I believe we have some unfinished business. About your father." Jonathan's mind raced. "Who are you?" "Someone who knew your father better than anyone," the man said, "and someone who knows why your mother left." Margaret appeared behind Jonathan, whispering, "Don't let him in. It's a trap." Curiosity overrode caution. Jonathan stepped aside. The man introduced himself as Richard Nolan, a former associate of his father's, claiming to hold crucial information about a decades-old disappearance, a local businessman who vanished amid scandal. Nolan described a network of corruption, implicating police and prominent townspeople. Jonathan's father had tried to protect the family, but had been ensnared in criminal dealings that went deeper than anyone imagined. "You need to understand something," Nolan said, leaning in. "Your father did what he thought was right, but some people aren't done with him or with you." Jonathan swallowed hard. Shadows of the past were not just memories. They were alive, dangerous. Suddenly, a gunshot echoed from the backyard. Nolan froze. Jonathan ran to the window and saw a figure disappearing into the rain, leaving a message scrawled in the mud. "Stop or you die." Rain hammered the roof as Jonathan and Nolan huddled over a map spread across the kitchen table. The storm outside seemed to echo the chaos growing inside Jonathan's mind. Nolan pointed to a series of marked locations: old warehouses, abandoned docks, and a property long thought deserted. The property where Jonathan's father had often disappeared for business meetings. "These places," Nolan said quietly, "hold the truth about what your father was involved in and what your mother feared." Jonathan's hand shook as he traced the lines on the map. He had always believed his father was just a small-town businessman, a man of integrity. But the diary, the warnings, and now Nolan's revelations painted a different picture, one filled with danger, deception, and crime. Margaret's voice broke the silence. "Jonathan, this isn't just about the past. If you go looking, you're putting yourself in danger. I've already lost one parent. I won't lose you too." "I need to know," Jonathan said firmly, his gaze never leaving the map. "I can't live in a house built on lies." Nolan leaned back, studying Jonathan carefully. "Then we start with the docks. Your father's records, his contacts, everything that could expose the people who still want him. And you, gone." By nightfall they arrived at the waterfront. Fog rolled over the water, cloaking the abandoned warehouses in a ghostly pallor. Jonathan's heart pounded with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The first warehouse was boarded up, the windows broken and dark. They pried open a side door and slipped inside. The air smelled of mildew and rust. Jonathan's flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing crates stamped with shipping labels decades old. Documents, photographs, and ledgers were stacked haphazardly. As he sifted through the papers, one name kept appearing: Richard Nolan. Jonathan froze. "You?" he asked. Nolan's eyes didn't waver. "Yes," Nolan admitted. "I was part of it once, but I walked away. Your father, he didn't, and some people never forgive." Jonathan's pulse quickened. Every document told a story of money, deals, and disappearances. One ledger listed transactions linked to the businessman who had vanished years ago. Evelyn's worst fears realized. Jonathan began to understand the depth of his father's secret life. He had tried to protect the family by playing a dangerous game with men who would kill to keep their own secrets. Suddenly, a noise echoed from above, a floorboard creaking. Jonathan spun around, flashlight cutting through the blackness. No one. Then another sound, this time closer. Footsteps descending. Before he could react, a shadow lunged, Nolan shouted, tackling the intruder. The struggle was brief but violent. The intruder fled, leaving behind a single clue, a matchbook with a familiar logo. The town's old private club, a place Jonathan had visited as a boy with his father. The old private club loomed in the distance, its once grand facade now faded and grimy under the heavy rain. Jonathan gripped the matchbook tightly in his hand. Memories of childhood visits with his father. Cocktails in polished glasses, laughter echoing through chandeliers, clashed sharply with the sense of danger now pressing in. "Are you sure about this?" Margaret asked from the passenger seat, her eyes wide with worry. "This is the place your father, your whole life, it's tangled up in this." Jonathan shook his head, determination replacing fear. "If this is where it starts, then we have to go in. I need to see for myself." They entered cautiously. The air inside smelled of dust and stale tobacco. Faded photographs of men in suits adorned the walls. A bartender, old and wary, looked up as they approached. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice gruff. "I'm looking for records. Anything connected to my father. Richard Nolan mentioned this place." Jonathan's voice was firm but calm. The bartender's eyes flicked to Nolan, who had followed behind. "Records? You don't want to dig through the past. Some things are better left forgotten." Jonathan felt a pang of unease. The warnings were coming from every direction, but he pressed on. Behind the bar, Nolan pointed to a small door leading to a back office. Dust-covered files were stacked on shelves, yellowed papers crumbling at the edges. Hours passed as Jonathan sifted through the documents. He found ledgers with coded entries, letters detailing hush payments, and photographs showing his father with men he had never seen before. Among them was a photograph of the businessman who had disappeared, alive, smiling, standing next to Jonathan's father. This can't be," Jonathan muttered. "Why wasn't this ever made public?" Nolan's face grew grim. "Because the people involved were powerful. They controlled everything. Your father tried to navigate it without destroying the family, but he couldn't escape completely." Suddenly, a floorboard creaked behind them. Jonathan spun around. A man in a black coat appeared, his face obscured by shadow. "You shouldn't be here," the man said calmly, but the tone carried a deadly threat. "Your father made a mistake trusting people like me, and now you're making the same mistake." Jonathan's pulse raced. He knew now that the past was not a memory, it was a trap. "Who are you?" he demanded. The man smiled coldly. "Someone who finishes what your father started, or destroys those who get too close." Before Jonathan could react, the man vanished into the shadows. The office door slammed, and papers flew across the room. Margaret clutched Jonathan's arm. "We need to leave," she urged. "Now." Jonathan grabbed the matchbook from his pocket. He realized the private club was only the beginning. The names in the ledgers, the people in the photographs, the threats, they all led to a single, unavoidable truth. Back at the house, Jonathan laid the photograph and envelope on the dining table. The rain outside drummed steadily against the windows, a relentless reminder that the storm of the past was far from over. His hands trembled as he carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single letter, written in his father's careful, looping script. "Jonathan, if you are reading this, it means I have failed to protect the family. The truth you seek is dangerous, more dangerous than you can imagine. But you must know. Your mother's disappearance, the businessman who vanished, the men who watched us, they were all part of a chain I could not break. You are the key to ending it. Trust no one completely. Start with the docs. Everything begins there." Jonathan read the letter twice, each time feeling a mix of anger, confusion, and sorrow. His father had left him a roadmap to the truth, but also a warning. Margaret entered quietly, watching him. "What is it?" she asked. "It's everything," Jonathan said, voice tight. "My father knew the danger all along. He was protecting us, but it cost him everything. And now, he's left me to finish what he started." Margaret's face hardened. "Jonathan, you're playing with fire. Whoever wrote those threats, whoever attacked us at the warehouses, they won't stop. This is bigger than us." Jonathan ignored the fear. He needed answers, and he needed them now. The docs, the photographs, Nolan's warnings, they were pieces of a puzzle that refused to stay silent. He felt the weight of generations pressing down, the secrets of his parents, lives intertwining with the present in a deadly tangle. That night he returned to the docks alone. The fog clung to the water like a ghostly veil. Nolan had warned him, trust no one. Jonathan scanned the shadows, his flashlight slicing through the mist. He noticed footprints in the mud. Recent, human, deliberate. Someone had been here after him. The footprints led to a small, hidden shack. Jonathan approached cautiously, hearing whispers from inside. He crouched, peering through a cracked window. Inside, two men pored over documents, ledgers, photographs, and letters identical to the ones Jonathan had found. One of them was Nolan. The other was someone he had seen in the photograph from the club, a man who had always seemed friendly in town, but whose presence now radiated menace. Jonathan's heart raced. What are they doing? He whispered to himself, and why is Nolan involved again? Before he could decide his next move, a hand grabbed his shoulder. Spinning around, he faced Margaret, her eyes wide with fear. You shouldn't be here, she hissed. They'll kill you if they find out you've seen this. Jonathan shook his head. I have to know. This is bigger than us. It's about the family. It's about the truth. They watched together as Nolan handed the other man a photograph, Jonathan's childhood home, with markings that suggested surveillance, strategy, planning. The realization hit him like a cold wave. His life had been monitored, manipulated, controlled from the shadows, long before he knew the danger existed. The shack was silent, except for the soft drip of water from the roof. Jonathan's heart pounded as Nolan stepped forward, hands raised in a gesture of peace or surrender. I can explain, Nolan said, his voice low but urgent. Everything I did to protect you and your father's legacy. Jonathan's gaze hardened. Protect me? Or protect yourself? The man who had been with Nolan, the same figure from the photograph at the club, stepped closer, a grim smile tugging at his lips. Sometimes protection and betrayal looked the same, he said. Margaret gripped Jonathan's arm, whispering, Be careful, one wrong move. Nolan sighed heavily. Your father owed a lot of people, powerful people. I made choices to keep you alive, but I lied to you. I didn't tell you everything, because I was afraid you'd follow me down the wrong path or get yourself killed. Jonathan felt a surge of anger and betrayal. All these years, the attacks, the lies, the secrecy, it was all part of this? Yes, Nolan admitted, and now it's out of my control. They know you're involved. They've been watching, waiting. Jonathan looked at Margaret, her eyes brimming with tears. He realized that the danger wasn't just about crime or business. It was about the family itself, about trust that had been fractured long before he understood why. The man from the photograph moved closer, placing a folder on the table. Inside were documents linking Jonathan's father to a series of financial crimes and illegal dealings. Everything that had been whispered about but never proven. Jonathan's stomach churned. The man smiled. Your father wanted to protect his family. But the truth is messy, Jonathan. Messy and unforgiving. Now, it's your turn to decide what you'll do with it. Jonathan clenched his fists. He thought of his mother, of the years of lies, of the fear that had haunted him since childhood. He realized that family was more than blood. It was trust, loyalty, and sacrifice, and the sacrifices had been made at terrible cost. I don't care about their money. I don't care about their power, Jonathan said firmly. I want the truth, all of it, even if it destroys me. Nolan looked at him, pain in his eyes. Once you know, there's no going back. Are you ready? Jonathan nodded. I have to be. As they began to sift through the documents, Jonathan discovered evidence that his mother had uncovered years ago, proof that someone close to them had orchestrated the disappearance of the businessman, manipulated his father, and nearly ruined the family. The realization hit him like a thunderclap. The betrayal had come from within. Suddenly, a noise outside the shack shattered the tense calm. Heavy footsteps approached, deliberate and slow. Jonathan froze. The shadow in the doorway advanced slowly, each step measured, deliberate. Jonathan's pulse raced, every muscle tensed. Margaret whispered, Jonathan, run. But he didn't move. He couldn't. Too much had been hidden for too long. Nolan stepped forward, placing himself between Jonathan and the intruder. It's me you want, the man said, voice eerily calm. Not him, not her, me. Jonathan squinted through the dim light. Recognition flickered. His father's old business partner, the one whose disappearance had haunted him as a child. You? Jonathan demanded. All this time, it was you controlling everything? The man smiled, a thin, cold smile. Control? Perhaps, but survival, Jonathan. Survival is what we do when the world leaves us no choice. Margaret clutched Jonathan's arm, trembling. What do you want from us? Truth, the man said simply, and revenge. Your father crossed me, and I've been waiting for years for this moment. You see, Jonathan, family ties are weak when weighed against ambition and betrayal. Jonathan's anger flared. You destroyed our family, manipulated our lives, and you think you can walk in here and justify it? The man's calm demeanor didn't waver. I justified nothing. I survived. And now, I offer you a choice. Join me, or die. It's always been your father's legacy. Survival at any cost. Are you like him, Jonathan? Or are you better? Jonathan swallowed hard, the weight of generations pressing on his shoulders. Could he truly continue the cycle of lies, manipulation, and crime? Or could he break it, even if it meant facing death? Nolan's eyes were filled with regret. You don't have to choose alone, he said softly, but you have to choose fast. There's no more time. Jonathan glanced at Margaret. Her courage and trust gave him strength. We don't play your game, he said. We end it. Tonight. The intruder's expression flickered with surprise, just for a moment, before he lunged forward. Jonathan reacted instinctively, grabbing a heavy wooden chair and swinging it. The intruder staggered but recovered quickly, pulling a concealed knife from his coat. Chaos erupted. Margaret screamed as the fight became a blur of motion, shadow, and sound. Every movement carried the weight of survival, of protecting a family that had been shattered by lies and greed. Jonathan felt a surge of adrenaline and desperation, fueled by memories of his mother's disappearance and his father's hidden burdens. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the intruder stumbled, tripping over a crate. Nolan lunged, restraining him. Jonathan's chest heaved as he realized the immediate danger had passed, but the battle was far from over. He looked at the intruder, panting, wounded but alive. Tell me everything, Jonathan demanded. No more secrets. The man's eyes met his, dark and weary. Slowly, he began to speak, unraveling the full story of deceit, betrayal, and hidden alliances that had haunted the Nolan family for decades. Jonathan stared in disbelief, his mind struggling to process the words. The final piece of the puzzle, the mastermind behind his family's suffering, was someone he had known and trusted all his life. His mother's closest friend, Elaine, the woman who had helped care for him as a child, who had comforted him through every loss. Margaret gasped. Elaine? No, it can't be her. Jonathan shook his head, anger and sorrow warring within him. She manipulated everything. Every disappearance, every threat, every lie, it was her. She orchestrated my father's downfall and forced Nolan into complicity. She used loyalty as a weapon. Nolan stepped forward, grim. I suspected, but never had proof. She's clever, patient, ruthless. She didn't just want control. She wanted the family broken, piece by piece. Jonathan's hands shook. Memories flooded him. Elaine's visits to the hospital when his father was ill, the whispered reassurances, the moments of subtle influence over decisions. Every kindness now felt tainted, calculated. He knew what he had to do. We confront her, he said, voice steady, though his heart pounded. No more secrets. No more shadows. By midnight, they reached Elaine's house. The storm had returned, rain hammering the roof and wind rattling the windows, as if nature itself sensed the climax of the long, dark saga. Jonathan's hand hovered over the doorknob. Every instinct screamed caution. Every memory screamed betrayal. When Elaine opened the door, she smiled, warm and familiar, but Jonathan saw through it. Jonathan, I was afraid you'd find out, she said softly. But you can't stop what I've started. It's too late. Too late for what? Jonathan demanded. For lies? For betrayal? For destroying our family? Elaine's calm demeanor cracked. I did what I had to do. Your father, your mother, none of them understood the world we live in. Power, control, survival. It's the only language they respect. I just accelerated what was inevitable. Jonathan's fists clenched. You destroyed trust, love family. That's not inevitable. That's cruelty." A tense silence fell. The rain pounded outside, echoing their unspoken fury. Then, with deliberate calm, Jonathan stepped forward. "You made your choice. Now it's time for consequences." Elaine's eyes widened in fear. For the first time, she saw the resolve in Jonathan, the same determination his father once had, but refined by pain, loss, and insight. She realized that her control had ended. Nolan and Margaret watched as Jonathan confronted the woman who had haunted their lives. No gunfire, no violence, just the undeniable force of truth, courage, and the weight of generations confronting a mastermind who had underestimated the strength of the family she sought to destroy. By dawn, Elaine was gone, arrested, her empire of manipulation dismantled. Jonathan, Margaret, and Nolan stood outside the house, the first light of morning breaking through the storm clouds. The air smelled of rain and possibility. Jonathan exhaled, a sense of exhaustion mingling with relief. "It's over," he said softly. "Finally, it's over." Margaret leaned against him. "It feels like we survived a lifetime in one night." Jonathan nodded. He thought of his father, of the sacrifices and hidden burdens that had shaped his path. "We survived," he said, "and now we can rebuild. We can choose who we want to be, without fear, without shadows." Emotional close, the family stood together, weathered but unbroken, looking at the horizon. The secrets of the past were exposed, the lies confronted, and the chains of betrayal broken. The storm had passed, leaving clarity in its wake. Final thought: some scars never fade, some losses remain. But Jonathan knew that the truth, no matter how painful, had finally freed him and his family from the shadows of the past.